Is the transfer portal good or bad for college football? That is the question we will try to answer today. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Are the pros outweighing the cons in the use of the transfer portal as it is evolved over time? I really want to dive into each scenario, some of the most common ones, and seeing if they're more beneficial to the sport. Are they justified in their actions? What are some things that the transfer portal can do in order to optimize and be better? Because I think we can all agree, no matter what your opinion is of college football at this point, because there's plenty of other factors that have to be baked into this pie, especially with the NIL front, the college football playoff in that context. But the transfer portal still needs work. This sport still needs work. And so we're going to take a step back, walk through some scenarios, and I would love to hear your guys' feedback on what you think would be the best option for the transfer portal. This is an open discussion, so let's dive on in. But before we dive in, quick self promo. I'll take 15 seconds of your time. The only question I'll ever ask from you is give me a chance to talk football with you. Whether it's a like, comment, subscribe, anything across the board means the world to me. We have so much momentum with this channel. And so if you're a new or returning viewer, thank you so much. And like I said, all I'll ever ask from you is give me a chance to talk football with you. The transfer portal had gone through a ton of changes since its inception in 2018. The NCAA wanted to formalize a process of moving from school to school with all the eligibility questions. There was a lot of pieces that were baked into the pie that made it very difficult. So they formalized what the transfer portal would be in 2018. Then we go to 2020, where they had added extensions, obviously, for what happened in 2020. They didn't want to take away an athlete's last year because of what was cut short. And so they gave an extension about 1 year. That's why you see a lot of players who have like 5th, 6 years because of these eligibilities from the year of 2020. Then you get to 2021, and there was a major change within the transfer portal. If you did not know, when you originally had to transfer, you had to wait a year. One of the best examples I could think of, to my understanding and from my memory, so you can fact check me on it, was Kyler Murray going from Texas A&M to Oklahoma. He had to wait an entire year before starting for Oklahoma. That was the transition from Baker to Kyler. Then you get to 2022. The NCAA had announced from case-to-case basis, because of the events in 2020 to 2021, they were going to allow a lot more flexibility in their eligibility if you had submitted a good enough case. You got to remember, when I'm talking about the NCAA, I'm not just talking about college football. This is for every single sport. And so there was a lot of specific cases that could grant an eligibility. One of the best examples I can think of is college baseball. You could see it from time to time. There's a lot of eligibility cases for certain players, and sometimes they grant D2 eligibility, but not D1. It's a very interesting thing that the NCAA likes to pick and choose their battles with. I think of a former NCAA case with the UNC wide receiver that they grant eligibility because of case-to-case basis. There was enough pushback. That's another video for another day for like a historical deep dive. But the point was, they had announced that they were considering a lot more flexibility depending on the case. Then you get to 2024, which was the elimination of transfer limits for eligible athletes. There was a lot of legal pressure for the NIL front on allowing athletes to not be able to have these limits. You know, when I talk about the eligibility for one-time transfers, that one time, gone. There's no limits to your transfer portal movement, which kind of broke the dam. It kind of let all hell break loose when we're talking about the transfer portal and the use for it. So with those rule changes in mind, let's talk about the volume according to On3. Just last year, 3,337 college football players hopped into the transfer portal, with over 67% of them committing to another school. Then we have 3.75% of them withdrawing from the transfer portal, most likely going back to their original school. So why is this the case? Why is there such an insane volume of players going from one school to another, or going into the transfer portal and kind of being left in the dust with no other options to potentially go to JUCO, maybe Division II? You're kind of left with basically just grabbing what you can and just getting away from your original school. That's just part of the issue with the transfer portal, is there's no real protections for the players. If you hop in and you're just kind of SOL because no other school sent you an offer, that's just how life works. And it is pretty unfair for the player, but that's the risk for hopping into the transfer portal. And it's part of the reason why I think one of the biggest solutions, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth at the end of this video, college football needs a players association just across the board to protect the players on NIL fronts, and there needs to be a lot more formalization if we're going down the route of kind of being NFL junior, which, let's be honest, that's where they're pushing the sport to go. Whether I like it, whether you like it, you got to have some sort of formalization to not only protect the programs involved, but protect the players more importantly. So let's talk about scenario 1. 1.6. What does that number mean to you? What does it mean to college football players? That is the estimated statistic of college football players who will one day go pro. 1.6% of all collegiate football players. That's it. And why am I telling you this? Well, think about it from the perspective of you are a lower level athlete coming out of high school. You go to a lower level school and you ball out, you develop. You're one of the best players on your team, but you just don't have the eyes to be focused on you. It's just exposure. That's it at the end of the day. Very similar to high school recruiting in all sports. You need the spotlight. You need the opportunity to have the right pair of eyes to be focused on you. And in previous years and before the transfer portal, yeah, you could have transferred, but you were risking an entire year of sitting out. We've seen it time and time again with other professional athletes. Sitting out a year could risk a lot. Not only that, you are risking a year of a potential injury in training. Like, there's so many risks involved with waiting. That's why they got rid of that rule. But on top of that, if you go and transfer somewhere else and you go to a bigger school, you have more eyes on you. The best example I can think of now, Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech was a baller. A lot of people knew that. And I'm sure he would have been drafted regardless if he had stayed at Georgia Tech. But I guarantee you, and I'm willing to put money where my mouth is, I don't think he gets drafted as high as he does and gets the opportunity and the exposure that he does if he did not make the move to Alabama. And there's a double-edged sword with that, because we are talking about from the player's perspective, but we're not talking about from the coaches and the lower level programs perspective. One of the biggest concerns from coaches, especially at the lower level with the transfer portal, and this is where one of the negatives sit in, more of a con, is it's so difficult to build up a program at the lower level and have continuous success. And I talk about lower level, I'm talking about low level Big 12 teams, and then also the group of 5, low level ACC teams. Just it's a lot more difficult, especially knowing you have the SEC, the Big 10, these bigger programs that could go and turn around during the transfer portal season, scout out your whole team, maybe potentially tamper a little bit, get in their ear, say we can give you an NIL bag, and it'd be a dumb decision for the player to not go. You're not going to get like an example like Ashton Genty, who gets those offers but wants to stay with Boise State and then ends up having a career year. He's going to be a projected top 15 pick. That just doesn't happen much in college football. A lot of the times you develop a player for 3, maybe even just 2 years, and then they get plucked and go to Alabama, they go to Michigan, they go to Ohio State. And now you as a coach who is being reflected by how good your team is, the record, athletic directors sometimes will miss out on that context and you're put in a bad spot. That's a lot of the times why, with this continuous rotation of rosters and having to not only get a kid in the door, whether it's high school or potentially another college, you have to make sure they're happy enough to stay there. It's why you see more time and time again, general managers are getting a more prevalent spot in college football athletics, because the roster management on top of the schedule is way too difficult for these head coaches. So I get a spot for a kid for 1.6%, anything to help you grade your chances, better your opportunity. I get it for the student. I get it for the player to go get that chance. But I also feel and empathize, and I feel like this is almost lost on what the impact is to those lower level schools. A lot of the times they're just like, oh, well, they're just kind of SOL, they'll figure it out. But the development of these head coaches aren't getting the best opportunity to shine and let them get to a bigger program. The funnel is a lot more difficult at this point. Let's talk about the second scenario, because when you hear me empathize with a head coach, a lot of college football fans' go-to response is saying, well, coaches leave all the time. They'll stand on that press conference booth and they'll say, oh, I love it here. My wife loves it here. And then boom, they are in a new town, new job, new school, new everything. and those relationships built up over years and years with those student athletes, they just leave them in the dust. And then for a while, it was just those student athletes were stuck at that school, left to roll the dice to what the athletic director would want. And that's risking their 1.6% to go to the next level, their development, what they had bought into the program. And then now we get these monumental shifts of players following along. I think of Deion Sanders, Jackson State to Colorado. The most, I think, iconic one and the most prevalent one that comes to mind is the USC, like the Oklahoma to USC, Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, all that change. And then I think a recent success example is also Curt Cignetti from James Madison to Indiana. So you have these success stories, and so you're allowing for this free movement. The problem is not that. I don't have any problem with that. I fully understand that a head coach should be able to move and a student athlete should be able to move just as free. It's the problem of there's no barriers on each side, because here's the root of the issue from it, because I think a very simple solution has a complex way of actually accomplishing it. The simple solution is if we are going to treat the coaches with the contracts with the schools, and they have to buy out those contracts and they have to be tethered to the school in order to move. There's like a very simple, it's just like moving from job to job and you have these contracts. The difference with the students is there's no contract with the school. There's not that formalization. You have the NIL collectives. They do not directly get paid from the school. That's a very clear thing you have to understand. There's no direct payment. Like if I am an NIL athlete at Texas State University is not sending me a check. The collective is sending me a check and getting me the exposure to another brand. That's part of the issue, is these student athletes can just leave these NIL collectives or break contracts. A lot of times, one of the best examples I can think of was Walter Nolan with Texas A&M was posting about, hey, Texas A&M recruits, make sure when you are talking with the NIL collective, you are reading the fine print. You are looking through and seeing what you can and cannot do in terms of payment. And that not only disgusts me, because at the end of the day, I know for a fact there's going to be student athletes that are being taken advantage of, and we don't have a players association to protect those kids, to protect them from getting finessed in a contract. Like that's just, at the end of the day, what pisses me off the most. And the fact that we haven't just grown a pair and just said, we're going to just pay the athletes directly, instead of this notion of, well, NCAA, we lost in a battle to Tennessee. We're going to throw our hands up and we're going to pick and choose our battles and when to step in and actually be the authority here, when in reality, they do nothing. I mean, I just think of it in a sense of the NCAA with Michigan. If NCAA had put sanctions on Michigan, a ban, you realize they could still make the college football playoff because it's a separate entity? That's crazy. And I understand I'm going on a little bit of a rant about the NCAA, but like I said at the beginning of the video, there's so much context baked into the pie. And I think the point of what I'm trying to say for this entire video, as we walk through just two simple scenarios, two very common ones, and we have a third one we'll talk about, the real goal of what I'm trying to communicate here, it's not the transfer portal that's the enemy. It's not just NIL that's the enemy. It's not these funneled one problems. The problem is we don't have organization across the board in a sport with 130 teams. Not only 130 teams, you have Division II, you have all these different things baked into it, and it's basically the Wild West. It is not just one problem will fix college football, the best sport on the face of the planet. We could fix Big Noon Kickoff. It's not going to fix the sport, which that, by the way, it's getting its own video. Big Noon Kickoff's getting its own video. Just watch out for that one, because I'm going to get heated in that one. But college football needs so much more than just saying, oh, let's get rid of the transfer portal. Let's expand the transfer portal. That's not the issue. Protecting the athletes and protecting the coaches and helping them in their perspectives, and not just trying to win one side or the other. Because if you take away the transfer portal, the coaches are benefiting from it. If you make it super mass, like freedom to do whatever you want, I think the players benefit from it, but the coaches get hurt from it, especially as you get to the lower level. And that's going to make people, I mean, honestly, retire. I think Dabo Swinney's going to retire over this. A legend. I think guys like Chip Kelly in the NIL front in the transfer portal, he went to an offensive coordinator role from one Big Ten school and being a head coach to an offensive coordinator role. That's crazy. And it's only going to get more and more crazy. So let's talk about version or scenario 3. Scenario 3 is the one I have the least amount of solutions for, and I want to hear your actual response if you're at this point in the video. It's the mid-season transfers. It's the tampering. And I think those are just not going to go away. As frustrating as it is to see Jonte Cook hop in the transfer, which he's doing what's best for him because he got buried on the depth chart. People are saying he's quitting on his team. I could see both perspectives, right? Because a lot of people want to play the old school football where you just sit and you wait behind a backup and you wait for your moment. Not everyone is like Garrett Nussmeier, which I have so much respect for Nussmeier for waiting and sitting behind multiple quarterbacks and wanting to be the quarterback for LSU. That's what he wanted to do. And now he's thriving. I hope he goes and beats Alabama this weekend. And I get it from the player's perspective of just not wanting to wait, but I also just think some of them are too impatient. And these are the mistakes that young kids are going to make. They're going to get some other school in their ear saying, hey, you could come start for us and we're going to actually execute the promises that you heard in high school. And that just goes to the point of the tampering. And that goes back to my original point that the NCAA wants to be an authoritarian or an authority when they choose to. And that goes back to my point of wanting an actual organizational force that is consistent. And then we go to the other point of the midseason transfers. I think without this organization on the NIL front, you get situations with like Sluka from UNLV, who was not promised on NIL fronts. And then he leaves the team. He quits on the team because he's not getting paid, which I understand. If he got guaranteed money and then wasn't executed on it, I would feel some type of way. You would too, don't lie. But then you get Jane Rashada. Like, there's so many simple use cases, and you got to realize, I said 2018, the transfer portal was formalized. 2018. We're about 7 years into this. And we have all these crazy stories, and it's only going to get more and more crazy. The point I'm still trying to like emphasize is, remember, I'm not pointing at the transfer portal and saying that's the enemy, go get mad at that. I'm not pointing at the college football playoff and saying they're the enemy. I'm saying the enemy, like almost like Aaron Yeager, like who's the true enemy? Go look at the lack of organization within the sport, and that's the issue I have. I've almost turned this into a state of the address of college football. So I appreciate you if you're still at this point watching this video, because it does mean the world to me. And so we're going to wrap it up with one simple question. Just give me a chance to talk football with you guys. That's all I'll ever ask. I appreciate so many of you guys. We have 900 people have actually clicked subscribe within the past like 10-ish days. That's crazy to me. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for taking that opportunity to give me a chance to talk football with you guys. So I will see you guys next time. On to the next video.